right, well, once again, here we are back on a Friday talking to the leaders in sports, business and entertainment, and hopefully we can give you some more gems that you can take away and use in your own life. Once again, brought to you by National Make Good Solutions, who are our great sponsors of ours and help put all this together and help us produce it and make it the show that it is. Our man that is our guest, well, I think when I was doing the research for this, I think his record in Australian basketball and Australian sport is very much underrated. When you look at his record, that he's an NBL MVP, won multiple grand finals in Australian basketball, gone overseas, played in NBA basketball. It's a fantastic body of work that he's been able to put together. First player to be drafted from the NBL to the NBA. And as we were discussing off air, he's been writing some very fine articles on the game that I think we should push him into writing a book because he's actually very good at it. But Chris Anstey, a very warm welcome. How are you going?
Good, Corey, mate. How are you? It's been a long time. We were just saying off air that probably haven't run into each other since we picked our kids up from primary school. We found out that they went to school together and nothing like that parent line picking the kids up from school.
Well, the funny thing is, I think between us, they're always going to know who's your kids and who's my kids, aren't they?
This is true.
they're not going to be the short kids that are running out of school anytime soon. So,
no, I'll tell you what, it's funny. It's even on that. It's my little fella now. He's 16 years old and he's already probably 6'9", 6'10", and it's one of those interesting ones. Kids that size and they look a bit different tend to get picked on a bit. And it's funny. I've kind of given him the green light to be a little bit of a smart ass if people go a little bit over the top. So I've had a couple of calls, and he's actually quite witty with it. But he stands out and. He's able to have a little bit of fun with it, which is fantastic.
I think everyone's having a bit of a giggle out there when you said, "Oh, the little fella," and he's 6'9", like that. Everyone's little because when you're 7'1" like you are, everyone else is the little fella. So it is. I'm sure everyone just had a little bit of a giggle at that. But before we hook into the basketball, I reckon it's probably not made enough that. Unbelievably, that you could have gone down the path and could have been very good at tennis. And of all people, for all the Australian audience listening out there, that your doubles partner was a guy that went on to play 400 games of AFL football, and I played a lot of football against him, was the great Dustin Fletcher. So you two, you got Dustin Fletcher that's probably 6'5" and you're 7 foot.
It's funny that it's kind of the reason that I actually started putting some of these ideas and started writing, because over the years, and you've been around sport long enough, you sit in meeting after meeting and you've got career counsellors who talk about pathways. And, we just never thought that they were anything more than a suggestion. For us, it was always more about how you were and how you behaved and how your habits were and all those sort of things, because we sort of joke about it today that there's still nobody in the world that says to play 400 AFL games, you've got to play tennis until you're 16. And to play in the NBA, you've got to play tennis until you're 17. But looking back, it was, we used to go to all the Victorian country tournaments that, Kenny Fletcher and Rosemary and their kids would load up the caravan and our family would go up with them. And our families would have holidays up on the Murray River and wherever we went. And, Dustin and I'd be playing tennis tournaments, and we're pretty good. But what we probably didn't know we were getting good at was, we actually had to have really quick feet and quick hands and good reflexes and be able to read a ball in flight through the air, and little things like that. I think are a bit of a lost art sometimes, where athletes can become a little bit robotic. And because we both started so late, I think those were the sort of things that allowed us to transition into another sport and do it pretty well. But no, we still catch up and have a bit of a laugh about it, and we might have to have a hit one day.
You think, look, as you mentioned, because I think mine was a little bit similar, do you think kids nowadays, they probably just think, right, I'm going to play one sport? It's probably something that you'd encourage a lot of young kids nowadays, just to go and try a lot of different sports, because as you said, you can pick up a lot of different skills from all sorts of sports that one day could hold you in good stead, like it did for you going to play basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, throwing balls at each other, kicking, just even little things you do around the place. But I guess our case studies are our own kids, and, I love my kids playing as many sports as they can. And, working on their feet. But the other thing is, more so than being great at it, I think every kid deserves the opportunity to figure out what sport they love.
Yeah.
And if you only play one or two, you may never know. I certainly had no idea I was going to love the game of basketball. My little fella's, like he's only 5 years old and he loves soccer. I mean, go figure. But it was just one of the things we do in the backyard, and that's the one he's chosen to do all the time. Not chosen to do, he's 5 years old. But it's amazing what kids love, and I think as parents and maybe as coaches and teachers, it's probably our responsibility to expose kids to as many sports and just experiences, I think, in life as we possibly can, and not pigeonhole them.
Yeah, and that's 100% right. At least, like you said, try a number of different sports, because if you're not good at one, well, you can always branch off into another one. And I think sometimes, kids nowadays, you put so much pressure on yourself in terms of wanting to be good at a particular sport. But I know, and it was the case for me, that I played golf and then ended up going into footy. So it definitely is the case. Now, you've seen it nearly go full circle in terms of basketball in Australia, because when you came onto the scene at when was that, 1994, going into the Melbourne Tigers. Now, for the people old enough that remember it, this is when basketball was really up and humming in Australia. You had obviously the Gaze family that are synonymous with the Melbourne Tigers, and then you had Mark Bradkey, Copel, and these sorts of guys. What was it like as a young, gangly kid? I reckon, you would have been probably 86 kilos ringing wet. You're probably about 7 foot tall.
Mark Bradkey and Dave Simmons, Rob Sibley used to beat the living hell out of me every single day. And I was so new to the game. Not only was I learning the game, but I was just getting beat up in the nicest possible way. There was one day I'll never forget. Mark Bradkey was a little bit grumpy, and I was, like you said, that tall, gangly, naive kid who just had all kinds of energy. And I ran down to the block and tried to post up, and like I said, I might have just clipped him with my elbow, and he's just lifted up his forearm and marched me into the front row of the stands and pushed me. I'm tumbling over the first row of seats. I thought, I probably got to get a little bit stronger, because I wasn't trying to let him do it to me either. But it's funny. It's funny what you learn as you get a little bit older. But even through this whole isolation period, the question that I get, and I've coached now for 10 years, and the question I get from most kids is, who do I need to get in front of? What video do I need to make? All this sort of thing. And every development video I see in sport's got a ball in it. But so much of sport's played without the basketball. Can you get to your spots? Can you manipulate an opponent? And, it's been this really incredible time to work on us, our physical strength, our mental strength, just learn a little bit. And I think it's been a missed opportunity by a lot of people, because I know there was a weights guy that a lot of people in the sporting world know named Bruce Gray. If I hadn't have met him when I got to the Magic, I could have been the most skilled player in the world, and I would never have been a professional, because I would have gotten beat up. So, that was the real catalyst. Him and Gorgon, when I moved across from the Tigers, was investing in that and learning that I could actually be a little bit stronger and move a little bit better than what I had.
And it's funny, because if you had to come into the system nowadays, that would have naturally just happened. But it was, you really forced the move yourself, didn't you? Like, that you really orchestrated that.
The Magic?
To get across the Magic. And
it was a little bit of both. I mean, Lindsay always played his cards pretty close to his chest. I only played 1 or 2 minutes a game, and I knew I was raw. But at the same time, I'd played at their junior club with Des Middleton and Al Westover, who went on to coach the club for 2 and a bit years. And I already had a connection with the club because they'd treated me so well and were really patient with me. But, like I said, Lindsay played his cards really close to his chest, and he would always put together a fantastic veteran group and coach according to guys who knew exactly what they needed to do. And, the Southeast Melbourne Magic used to train at the same stadium. If anyone's been to the old Albert Park basketball stadium, there was a shoebox court almost as you walked in the door on the right, and the Magic would train there. And I used to see them doing all of these defensive drills, skill development work that I'd never seen before. And it just fascinated me. And it sort of occurred to me halfway through the Tigers year that I probably needed to go somewhere where it was more about development than it was winning NBL championships right now because I needed to get better. And then when I actually got the opportunity to meet with Brian Goorjian, and again, I'll never forget sitting down with him, and I was nervous. I'd heard about him, and he just challenged me straight away. What did I want with basketball? And I told him, I want to get better. I want to keep getting better. And he just looked at me like I was stupid. And he just kept prodding me until we came up with a plan. And, what he saw in me was probably greater than what I saw in me. He was talking Olympics. He was talking NBA. He was talking being the best running man in Australia and all that sort of thing. And so we set this plan that I thought was largely unachievable. And the thing with him, and I know it's taught everywhere now, but even in that meeting, we sat down and said, here's exactly how we're going to do it and who you're going to do it with. And he mapped it out. And probably the best thing he said to me, he said, just be aware this is going to be tough. But I want you to always remember one thing. He said, I'm never going to cut you. He said, you're going to struggle. People are going to think you've made the wrong choice because you'll be so sore, so tired when you get to game day. But if you don't go through this now, you're never going to come out the other side. You're going to be the same as what you were. So it was brutal. Lost sight of it a couple of times. And there was a week when he and Bruce Gray, the weights guy I mentioned, got together and they said, look, Anstey's a bit down on this. So they backed off on the weights and they backed off on the training, really without me even knowing, and sent me out into a game. And I played this the best game I'd ever played. And so Goorjian dragged me after everyone had gone home, dragged me aside, and he looked me dead in the eye and he said, do you believe me now? And I said, what? He said, we backed your training off. Now we're going to dial it up again. Let's go. You're coming out of this better than that. And that was all I needed, just maybe to see it a little bit as well. But he was a genius. Bruce was a genius. And all that crew was, I'm very, very thankful that they're the ones that laid the foundation for my career.
And from what you're saying, you'd nearly go as far to say that if you hadn't crossed paths with Brian Goorjian, that you wouldn't have gone on to the NBA.
No, I don't think so. He introduced all of us to a work rate we didn't know existed.
Yeah.
I think everyone thinks they work hard until they're introduced to somebody who drives you to work harder.
Yeah.
But you feel complete trust that it's not just crazily throwing you out there to injure you or be or dangerous about it. They've got your best interest at heart and they want to see you get better. And it wasn't just Goorjian. I mean, if I look back, it's all of the staff. And then you've been around footy clubs that, you could name 20 people no one's ever heard of. But it was all of them. And Gorge was the best at getting everyone pulling in the same direction.
And I do love the story about that you went to mediation, I think, as far as with the Melbourne Tigers.
Oh, yeah.
And then if you talk about
you have read my stories. Well done.
Not so much draft tampering, but to orchestrate a deal where you signed a 1-year deal for $181,000.
Yeah. Well, the thing was, I didn't. I was young and only been playing the sport for a couple of years, and I'd made my mind up to go and play with the Magic based on everything I've just said. And then, again, Lindsay played his cards pretty close to his chest, and the Magic had offered me a 3-year deal at $60,000 a year, which was incredible for me back then.
Yeah.
And so the Tigers came in and they had the right of last refusal, which was apparently one of the NBL rules, and I think it still exists today, where you can nominate one player. And if you match the contract, then they remain yours. So it was up to the Magic to go again. But if the Tigers matched, then I had to stay at the Tigers, no matter how much I wanted to leave. And, we went to a tribunal. We appealed it. The NBL board ruled that I had to stay at the Tigers. And, it was interesting because that Lindsay's best mates with all of the board, and you just knew that he knew the process and knew all of the rules and regulations. And I was gutted. I didn't want to go back, and I was a little bit stubborn as well. That young stubbornness. And
yeah. So
I'm going to college. I didn't even realise I wasn't eligible to go to college because I'd already played a year of professional basketball. And Goorjian and their CEO, Graham McNaney, called me one day and said, I think we might have a way to get around this. And again, it kind of spoke of the trust that the rest of the playing group had in Goorjian, the club, that they'd got the whole playing group into a meeting and they'd all re-sign their contracts to to represent the ability for me to earn a 1 year, $180,000 contract that we knew the Tigers couldn't match. They just couldn't. So I signed that, and every one of the other teammates signed a lesser contract, all trusting that the minute that the Tigers didn't match it, would come back and renegotiate. So it happened. The Tigers were grumpy. I was officially a Southeast Melbourne Magic player and walked back into the office and renegotiated a 3-year deal for $181,000. And all the other players went back to their original contracts, and we stayed. So yeah, it was a loophole. Yeah, it was clever. But I wanted to be at the Southeast Melbourne Magic more than anything. They, I guess, wanted me to be there, and I think it worked out really well for all of us.
What was the first game like when you played against the Tigers?
They were trying to beat the living hell out of me. But the thing was, keeping in mind as well that I'd started this weight program, so I wasn't very good. And I think after playing a couple of games, they're like, oh, we don't want that anyway, because I was going through this strength phase, and I wasn't playing very well. And even my first year at the Magic, I only played 8 or 10 minutes a game. It wasn't like the whole thing, and basketball is clearly not the AFL and the media, but the media had blown it up to be this thing about this incredibly talented kid being disloyal and switching clubs to cross-town rivals. And then I just went across and played 10 minutes a game, and like, what's that? Who cares? It took me a good 12 to 18 months before I really figured out that I deserved to be in the NBL and could compete.
Yeah. And then I suppose you had the interesting situation when you see the NBA draft nowadays that, it's such a big ceremony, and it's an enormous thing now, but you had the unique situation that you got drafted and you were actually in Melbourne, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. We'd played the Sydney Kings the weekend before, and, we had our training week, and Gorge had changed training to train on I believe it was a Tuesday morning. And the draft might have been a Monday night, I'm not sure. But we went into the Channel 7 studios with Mark Beretta and a few others who'd organised a direct link.
Yeah.
And, a few family and friends in there as well. And, yeah, we watched it on the screen, and it was one of those weird moments because I actually don't like being the centre of attention. I felt a little bit almost guilty and embarrassed that this was all about me. I didn't like it. And I had all I knew going into draft day was that if I was available with the 30th pick, the Chicago Bulls were going to draft me. That was the only draft day guarantee I had, and that was Jerry Krause, who'd flown over. I had no inkling that, Portland drafted me. I'd never spoken a word to them, so that was confusing. But, when it turned out that the Dallas Mavericks had made a pre-draft deal with Portland, that made a little bit more sense because Don Nelson had been over and I'd visited with them, and I didn't expect to go that high. My feedback was, like I say, the Bulls, but even if that fell through, probably early second round. So it gave me a guarantee, and it gave me a contract that was going to put me in the NBA for 3 years.
Is that a bit of a sliding doors moment? So you just mentioned that Jerry Krause came over. You had the meetings and basically saying, look, if you're available, we'll pick you at number 30. Was Luke Longley at the Bulls at that stage, or he wasn't?
Yeah, he was. It's funny that people, and I never really thought about it too much, and a few people sort of asked, you're about to go to the 1997-98 Chicago Bulls. Imagine how great that would have been. I said, yeah, keep in mind I could have stuffed it up for him. I could have been. So it might have gone the other way. I'm sure they're pretty happy with the way it worked out, but no, look, Luke was there, and all I would have ever been doing is coming in to get ready for the next year, like a lot of draft picks did back then, late in the first round. But I think everyone knew with me coming in, I wasn't someone who was going to come in and play a lot straight away. I was going to need a bit of time. And that was what Jerry Krause had said with the Bulls, that they had no requirement for their draft pick to play this year, as in you'd be around the group, you'd learn the game, and, we'll develop you. So sliding doors, yeah, maybe not. But I loved my time in Dallas. I got to play with Steve Nash. I got to play with Dirk Nowitzki, Michael Finley, and some really incredible players. And certainly don't regret those years. That they were fantastic.
Is it a bit weird seeing it, like when we've obviously just come through watching The Last Dance and the way that Jerry Krause is portrayed. Is it a bit weird seeing the way he's portrayed in there, and then yet you were having dealings with him potentially about being drugged?
Yeah, a little bit. I think everyone's got their own perception on people, and I think you can still be a good person but be perceived incorrectly. I mean,
yeah,
the same person could deliver the same message in two different ways and it'll be received better by one. I just don't think he delivered. I don't think he had the personality to deliver messages for the betterment. He was very business-minded. He was very black and white. And I think he probably meant well. And he was trying to do well by the club, but it just didn't come across that way. But I think the biggest one was, as a few of them said, watching the documentary, was if you do win a championship and if the club can afford to do it and the players are genuine in what sort of financial reimbursement they're asking, they almost earn the right to go again. I mean, but it's funny, and you've played in premierships where I reckon you sit down at the end, and I have, where one of the things the coach always says, or in the lead up, this is the last time this group's ever going to be together. It's very, very rare that you keep a championship or a premiership group together. So I don't think it needed to be blown up that badly, but it would have been great to see them go around again. I think they probably earned that right.
Yeah, 100%. When you first got there, like, you kid from Melbourne, you fly over, you go to America. Where was the moment where you had a bit of that holy shit moment where you went, actually, this whole thing's real? Like, I'm in America, I'm playing NBA basketball. Like, your journey just happened in the really the blink of an eye.
There was probably a couple. The first one was when I got to Tullamarine Airport and walked down the bridge to get on the aeroplane and turn left.
I was going to say, you wouldn't turn right. You'd be naturally turning left.
Yeah, but I mean, all the way to
7 foot tall, you're not going right.
Yeah, all the way to first class, and you're like, shit. Well, okay. And then you kind of feel, because I've always been the one, if I fly, I'll take exit rows and that, but I don't need to fly first class. I'd rather have the money to spend when I get to the other end. But that was different. I think the biggest one was they were almost back to back, where, because I actually hadn't signed my contract back then, you actually had to do it face to face. So before I could even train, I needed to officially sign my contract. So my agent had flown to meet me in Dallas, and we sat down around the table and we'd done it all, and you signed it. Just before I did, Leon, my agent, said, we probably need to get Chris situated and, maybe a little bit of money up front just so he can go and find a place to stay and all that, get his rent done. And so they gave me $250,000. I thought, shit, that's different. They just nonchalantly handed over $250,000, and I signed a contract worth $3 million US. And I thought, geez, I would have done this for nothing. And it just seemed that it was just this stupid amount of money. And then, of course, they take you into the change room, they give you all your stuff, and I've got more basketball gear given to me than I've ever had. But then you go out and you train, and every rookie's got a little bit of a target on their head. And I remembered Gorge, and I remembered my agent saying, when you get on the floor, don't try to be someone you're not, go to your strengths. And, the whole don't try to reinvent the wheel thing on your first day. So, the first or second possession down, I caught the ball in the block like I'd done a million times and took my one dribble to the middle with those words ringing in my ears, and thought I'll get to my little right-hand hook in the middle of the lane and make it or miss it, but it's what I do best. And so I elevated up into this shot, and a hand appeared and blocked it into the side wall, and I thought, shit, that's my best move. And it was Sean Bradley, and he's 7'6". And I'm like, shit, I'm going to have to get better really, really quickly here. And so probably within that 30, 40-minute block of signing that contract, giving a whole bunch of money, a whole bunch of free gear, and then the realization that I'm not very good. Again, I got to get better was probably it for me.
And then what moment, like, I suppose you had, because it's an amazing story hearing the way that unfolded, but where was the moment, like to say in your first season, it finally clicked and you went, hang on, I actually do belong here a bit? You got to that point where you either had a game or a moment, you actually got more confidence to go, I actually do belong here.
Yeah, there were 3 or 4, but it's probably towards the end of my rookie year where, I sat for 10 or 12 games at one stage where, Don Nelson said, where do you want your injury to be? We're putting you on injured reserve, you can go and train. But in that February, March period, it sort of culminated with 2 of my most memorable games, I suppose. And I was playing 30-something minutes a game. I think I was averaging 12 and 5 or something like that. And I sort of felt that I'd found my NBA rhythm.
Yeah.
It was a lot faster, a lot more athletic. And, being a part of the the win against the Chicago Bulls was incredible. And having a decent role in that and in overtime, that was surreal. But I had a 20-point game against the LA Clippers, and it was the thing about the game was actually, this is one not many people know, but I had a teammate named Martin Mersep who was from Estonia, and I think I had 24 and he had 20, or vice versa. Might have been vice versa. I think he had 24 and I had 20, and it was actually the first time, to my knowledge, in NBA history that 2 international players had been the top 2 scorers in an NBA game. And so there's a fair bit made of it at the time. And, not long after that, I had 26 against the Boston Celtics. So it was probably more a block of 3 or 4 weeks where I thought, yeah, okay, here we go. The lockout the next season for me was really bad timing. As we sat and we didn't play for months and months on end and trained like crazy, but it almost felt like it set me back a little bit, because I just needed to compete. I didn't need the gym. I needed that. So, I felt like I belonged. I would have loved to have had another swing at it, and I nearly got that later on in my career. But, people ask me, do I regret whatever? But I said, if I was good enough, other teams would have offered me contracts.
Yeah. And you mentioned, look, internationally, but why do Australia produce so many great basketballers compared to our relative size? Like, we're only a nation of like 30 million people, but when you look at the quality of basketball players that have, from yourself, the first one that came from the NBL to go to the NBA, and the Luke Longleys and all the guys that have come through the system, why do we, in essence, bat above our average with what we produce in basketball?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I'm not sure. It's there are a lot of others. If you look at Lithuania, they're a country of 3 million, are traditionally one of the best basketball nations in the world. So there are others around, and I think the thing with Australia that I've learned over the years is, because we're so geographically removed from the rest of the world, we tend to lose sight of what the rest of the world's doing. So there are other countries, I think, that sit in the same boat as us, that bat above their average. And the NBA is now so multicultural. There are players from everywhere. Luka Doncic at the Dallas Mavericks right now is from Slovenia, and I can't tell you the population of Slovenia, but whether or not they produce them, or whether or not Luka and the Aussies who've made it were going to do it anyway. I just think as the world's gotten smaller, if you look at most of the guys who are playing in the NBA now, outside of Joe Ingles, a lot of them took that collegiate path. So they got some exposure. The NBA and the NCAA know that Australian basketball players exist, and they scout it really, really thoroughly. So maybe back in the day they might have missed a few because the tyranny of distance, but I don't think the good players get missed anymore.
Yeah. And look, we touched on him before, but the impact of Luke Longley on your career, and even when you first got drafted, I just think it says a lot about him, the man, but just him picking up the phone and hearing that Australian voice on the phone. It's sort of like when you get to LAX and you hear that Australian voice on Qantas or Virgin, and you're going home. But how great was it to hear the big fellow, and basically pick up the phone and you've got this godfather of Australian basketball and give you some tips about the trappings and what goes on in the NBA.
Yeah, it was exactly that. It was, I'd been thrown in the deep end. It was a couple of weeks after I landed in Dallas, and he'd he'd got my number from the club. And like you say, he just called, Chris, it's Luke Longley. I'm just ringing to introduce myself, and, let you know that I'm here if you need me. And we chatted, and, kind of ended in the, mate, I know you're not coming up here to Chicago until December, but when you do, make sure when you land, you come to the house and you have dinner. And so just, and especially now, and again, having watched the Last Dance documentary, what he was going through. It was crazy with the circus that was going on around him. But probably one of the biggest things that I got from it, from just Luke picking up the phone, was exactly that it was okay not to be, for the NBA to be all consumed, to consume my entire life. There was still time have interest in other areas and to not live in that fishbowl that sometimes athletes do. And we chatted 3 or 4 times. I went to his house for dinner. We had a couple of beers, and we continually caught up a little bit.
This episode is brought to you by National Make Good Solutions, experts in taking your commercial property back to the day it was built at the end of your lease.
It was nothing. It was not one particular thing that he taught me, but he taught me plenty. But it was more that he took the time to reach out and to be available, and just that mindset was incredible.
Yeah. And hang on, your phone ringing in the background, is it?
There we go. Coming through the computer. Sorry about that one.
No, but I think even when I read that, sometimes people say, "Oh yeah, come over my house and come for a barbecue." Come and have a few beers. But I think being in the United States, in another country, and you're sitting there with someone like Luke Longley, just around his house, just basically, for want of a better word, you're just sitting around talking shit, talking about the footy, just to take your mind off. Even from a mental health point of view, to have have a mate over there, that's where that would have been invaluable, just to go over.
Yeah, absolutely.
House, let alone Luke Longley's house.
Yeah, and that's it. And it wasn't just that. I think it was, and again, if I go back and look at some of the best coaches and teammates I've had, they're the ones that invite you into their family. It's not just you and me having a chat at training. They're opening their lives to you. And you meet the family, you meet the kids, you walk into their house. It's kind of almost, one of those filters I've got, how good a mate are they? Would I invite them over by themselves for a beer at my house? But that was Longley. And I'm sure he's done it for other NBA guys that have gone across. But you're right, just to be sitting in, freezing cold Chicago. And I think it was the 28th of December, because from memory, the game was on the 29th. So it's Christmas. And so I'm away for Christmas for the first time. And I know that there's summer going on back home, and I'm in 3 foot of snow.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the Western Bulldogs and the AFL and what's going on and how the season was. And it just normalized, I think is the best word. It just normalized the NBA for me, and it became a lot less daunting to have someone like Luke to chat to.
Is the greatest compliment you can give him is what you'd want all Australians to be? Like, don't worry about the 3 NBA championships and all the other stuff that goes with it, but is that nearly the biggest compliment you can give him?
Yeah.
He's someone that you'd aspire to, that he opened up his doors, and he just becomes like that ultimate mate.
Yeah, he is. And and having said, don't get me wrong, I don't know Luke that well. We haven't had that many beers over the years, but it's amazing what you remember. But at the same time, everybody knows how private he is. So he's not the sort of guy that you ring up and bother for it. But I think the thing with Luke and with others is that you've never, ever heard Luke Longley tell anybody how great he is. People do that for him. I think that's a testament to how good a bloke he is and how good a player he is, that you'll never hear it from him.
Yeah.
It's other people that are going to tell you how great Luke is. Yeah.
And now, just going on to, speaking of the Bulls, that famous Mavericks game at the old arena, you have all the family there. Like, even in the top levels, or I suppose in the AFL, when I'd been out on the ground myself and you see your idols, what's it like to be out on the field or out on the basketball court, and you got the great Michael Jordan out on, like, he's there? Yeah,
it was surreal. It was even getting to the game, that the streets were packed. But getting, I wanted to get out on the court, and this is during that period of time where I'd been playing lots. I expected to play. When we played them in December, when I visited Luke, I didn't get on the court, and I was really disappointed. So I knew that this was going to be the only time that I ever got to play against the Chicago Bulls. And so I got out there early and I was warming up, and like you say, you look down the other end, and that's actually Michael Jordan. And you're in uniform, you're walking on the court, and you actually feel shit because you're looking down there and you're like, and you're shooting these little jump shots, and you just know that Jordan's doing his thing down the other end. But there's just an aura about him that, even the people around him are always locked in and engaged. But as it turned out, I didn't play a second in the first half, and I was gutted. I was, sitting there at half time, and I'll never forget thinking, all I wanted was a photo with him, because no one's going to believe this. I'm not going to get it. We're only down 8, but it felt like more. And I thought, if I get on in garbage time and he's still on, I'm going to try to foul him really hard and have him react, and maybe someone will take a photo. Then I'll get my Michael Jordan photo. You can't arm around his shoulder and, hey, Mike, would you mind looking over at you? But I got in early in the third quarter, and that nervousness came back, and that, it was incredible just being out there, and got fouled reasonably early on, and I went to the free throw line, and I shouldn't have done it, but I ended up under the basket. The whistle went. I turned around and walked back, and Jordan, Pippen, Phil Jackson, Steve Kerr, there's Luke. And it was just this feeling of, what am I doing here? This, shot 2 of the worst free throws of my entire life, and it was embarrassing. It probably took that to settle me down a bit, I think. And for whatever reason, Don Nelson chose to play me the entire third quarter, most of the fourth, and we ended up coming back, and Cedric Ceballos hit a 3 to tie it and send it in overtime. And I got subbed out to start overtime. I thought, well, that was nice. That was great to be a part of. And he subbed Sean Bradley in to win the jump ball and get us the first possession. And
now, sorry, just to jump in, and your coach had a theory about
who scores first in overtime wins 80%
scores
of the
first
time.
in overtime.
That's right. So he's looking down, going, hang on, and then we're up 5, and by the time I subbed in, and he subbed me back in for Sean, I think we're up 3 or 4. So now there's 3.5 minutes to go. Then there was this other sense of emotion where you're like, shit, I've just been subbed in to close out the Chicago. This is a whole different thing again. My biggest thing was, don't stuff this up. And at 30 seconds in, I hit a jump shot. And
it's a very good jump shot, by the way.
No, thanks. And then I ended up having a dunk and a couple of rebounds, and got into that little thing with Dennis Rodman, and talked a little bit of trash. And
just, what, I actually obviously watched that in the lead up, knowing I was going to chat to you about it. Was that actually a really pivotal moment also in your career? Because it shows that, you're not really going to cop any crap from anyone, regardless of who it was, that you had to show. That's your moment in certain contests in sport, that regardless of who it is, you can't act like you're intimidated.
I think so. And probably more so for other people. Like, I did hear from a lot of people around Dallas that I earned the crowds and the local Dallas fans respect for that, because they hadn't probably seen that yet. I was still trying to find my way. But it's still, maybe not so much in footy, but in a game of basketball, they're not going to start a fist fight with you. What's the worst that can happen? You're not really going to get hurt. So it's not asking too much to stand your ground and stand up for yourself. And that's all I was doing. And, I didn't swing. I knew exactly where he was, and he'd clipped me around the waist a few times. And if you watch the game, you'll see us niggling and hitting each other all game. And that was probably the only rebound I got while he was in the vicinity all game. He had 20-something rebounds.
He had 21 rebounds.
There you go, yeah. So he was probably...
It's not a bad night, 21 rebounds.
Yeah, it's all right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look, and then what you don't write about, and what you don't put on the highlights is the next possession I turned the ball over. Probably still thinking about it a little bit, but made up for it, and we won. And and even there's a few things. It's that, again, you learn lessons in retrospect. I think is that, what are the odds of beating the Bulls? 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000. It's a whole Dumb and Dumber thing. But if there's a chance, why not? I think so many athletes and so many people out there approach things like there's no chance of success. But it's got, if it's possible, why not? And that game for me was sort of that teaching moment in my life, that I've just approached things as if, maybe I'll fail, but why not have a crack? But even just tying back into Luke, we'd organised to catch up after that game, and I told my mates and my family, Luke's going to come out and have a few beers with us. And I think they were as excited about that as what they were watching the game. But then we won, and I'm thinking, and I said, this might not happen. And sure enough, about an hour after the game, my phone rings and it's Luke. And then I just knew he was ringing to cancel to say Phil had done this, or they're flying out, or whatever it was. And he's like, mate, running a little bit late. Do you mind if I bring a few of the boys along? And so, he brought Judd Bushler, Kukoc, Steve Kerr, a few of the bench guys. And, the mates of mine and my family had this incredible night, drinking beers and just hanging out for 4 or 5 hours with the Chicago Bulls. And that was as memorable for them as probably the game, because it was see, touch, feel. And that was Luke as well, is that Luke has this way of creating lifelong memories for people without even knowing it, I think.
And even better, he picked up the bar tab, didn't he?
Picked up the bar tab, and it was my local bar, and you kind of assume that you're going along all right. And I just caught him doing it, so I went up. He's like, "Mate, this is on me." I'm like, "No." I didn't argue too hard, but no, that was just how he was. You kind of caught him doing things a bunch of times. He picked up the tab, and I had an idea of how much it was. He paid him a lot more than what the tab was, but he was pretty thankful. He thanked the guy for a good night, and off he went. But he'd been known to do that over the years. And it's funny. I've told a few people that story, and they're like, "Yeah, well, he's made multi-million." I'm like, "Yeah, he doesn't have to. He doesn't go around flaunting it." And in Luke's own words, he if he's got something that he enjoys doing, he wants to share the things he enjoys with friends who ordinarily might not have the opportunity to participate in that. So it's actually him investing in his enjoyment and people he cares for enjoyment. So he's, again, probably spoken enough about Luke, but he's a ripper.
And I suppose, you have Luke there, but you obviously go on. Did he would have been a part of the team. How good was it to play for Australia at the Sydney Olympics? Because even I went up there. I was a guest of Nike and went up there for the Kathy Freeman final. And we had one of the great all-time days, courtesy of Nike, and Georgie Lawler. I know he probably was.
Georgie Lawler's a good man.
Great man, Georgie Lawler. But how good was it to represent your country at the home Olympics? Like, was it just amazing to be a part of, of Andrew Gaze and these sorts of guys? And I think Luke actually played in that as well.
And the Olympics it's a really, really interesting one. Walking into the opening ceremony with Andrew Gaze as a flag bearer was pretty incredible. That's where you felt that sense of national pride, I think. But playing for Australia is always a really interesting one, because people ask you all the time, what's it like to represent your country? And I think the easiest answer is one of the best things you can do. But for me, it was every time I pulled on an Australian jersey, I was still representing myself first. I don't mean for that to sound selfish, but then I was representing my teammates, my family, my friends, those close to me who allowed me to be in the position to pull it on. And then I think as well, you're also representing the people who nearly made the team but didn't, because you know what they would give to put it on. And you mentioned, what's Australia got 30 million people, but there's probably 29.9 million people you've never met. So I still think I was always representing those close to me first, because I knew that they were living every step and every minute with me. And then after that, I think the country almost came last. I don't mean for that to sound unpatriotic or anything like that. It was incredible, and the experiences were great. But that was one of those, I think, really special moments for me that I really enjoyed sharing with those close to me, as well as people that I'd never met. But I think, it's also the sort of thing that when you retire, I think it probably even means a little bit more.
Yeah. And we touched on him before, but the influence of Don Nelson on your actual life and career, and I've seen it. It's probably even like I noticed. You connected with like even Bob Murphy, and even we spoke about Acker. So it's not as if you're scared to go outside the sport of basketball to try and find ways to get better. But how great was he? Because he was a bit of a lateral thinker in the way that he went about it.
It's so many people today, I think, in all walks of life are pigeonholed. And I know as a 7-foot basketball player, certainly, get in the paint, get near the ring. And even I had coaches along the way who, as soon as you stepped out, was get back in the paint. You just weren't allowed to do a lot of things. And I actually just wrote something about Don Nelson. And as I wrote it, I was like, that's exactly what it was. That I said, Don Nelson just doesn't sort of encourage you out of your pigeonhole. He smashes them so you can never go back in. And he allows you to explore some of the things you're capable of. And I think that was it, that even, and I took a lot from him when I actually got to coaching as well. So I'll never forget, we recruited a guy named Matt Hodgson. He was a development player for the Tigers when I was coaching there. And, he'd just come back from St Mary's University, and 7-foot post player who I thought had really good touch, but same thing, he'd never been allowed out of the paint. And we went to do our first individual, and he said, "Where do you want to start?" I said, what have you never been allowed to do? And so I wanted to make it fun for him as well. And we started working on all these things he'd never been able to do before we brought it back to the things he was already good at. But I just reckon that there's a lot of players out there who can do a lot more than what they're allowed to do. So he was really incredible like that. And you mentioned Aki, you mentioned Bob Murphy. Aki was one that and he's really polarizing, as I'm sure you know better than anyone. But I was going through a whole bunch of stuff. This was back in 2009. I was going through a divorce. I'd already won a couple of championships and a couple of MVPs. So I was going all right, but just didn't want to be turning up to training. There was too much going on. I wasn't allowed to see my kids, all that sort of thing. And because I was captain of the club, I kind of felt that it was going to be a negative for the group if I told the team that I didn't want to be there. So I was looking for someone in my mind that, like, who can I think of that always seems like they've got something going on away from their sporting endeavour, but still seems to be able to manage to perform well week in, week out. I'm a Western Bulldogs fan, and so I just found myself driving along Beach Road in Melbourne one day, picked up my phone on hands-free, of course, and just rang the generic number for the Western Bulldogs Footy Club, and said, "It's Chris Anstey from the Melbourne Tigers," and sort of described a little bit. And I said, "I'd love to pick Jason Ackermanis' brain if you could pass on my phone number about how he prepares in and around all the distractions in his life." And before I got home, I was living in Port Melbourne. It was only a 20-minute drive. My phone rang, and like the Longley thing, "Chris, it's Acker. Do you want to get a coffee?" And I just kept driving all the way across to Moonee Ponds, and we probably chatted for a couple of hours and ended up catching up 5, 6, 7 times. And some of the things that he taught me or shared with me or just said more the point were really, really relevant, and I could take and apply them into what I was doing. And that really helped get me through that year. And I've told him that. I haven't spoken to him in a lot of years, but that was really, really important for me. And maybe even more important thing with that is I got to the off season and I was sort of reflecting a little bit on that conversation, and I thought, I picked up the phone one time. Why don't I just start calling everybody? And so I just started calling coaches and people I admire, people I respect, and not expecting them to call back. And most of them don't, but some of them did. I sat down with Craig Bellamy, sat down with Paul Roos, Rodney Eade, Bob Murphy in that context. I just wanted to learn. I think everybody, when they watch sport, some people fascinate them, or you respect or admire them from afar, and you'd love to get to know them a bit better. And so I just started calling people, and what I got from some of those conversations was better than I could get from a library full of books. It was just one of the best things I did, and it all came from picking up the phone and calling Acker that one day 12 years ago.
Was that when you were playing? That was before you started coaching, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was when I was still playing. So that year we ended up making the championship series and losing to the Dragons in the championship. But no, I was still going through. I was still playing then, and certainly I've done it a lot more since I've been coaching as well. But it's something I still do. I won't bore you with all of the different people I call, but it's something that it's funny. I challenge students to do all the time, especially now in isolation. Get on social media and send messages directly. If you don't hear back from them, so what? I mean, you've spent a minute or two of your life in the same spot as what you would have been if you'd never messaged. But what if they get back to you? It can be really, can change your trajectory of where you're going at some level. So it's this really powerful thing, I thought. And, even though still when I do it, I've done a little bit in sport, but you still sort of sit there sometimes and think, it's just, sitting there talking, coaching with Paul Roos felt surreal. When he was at Melbourne, you still allow yourself to be a little bit of a fan, I think, at some level, but that's why you've essentially reached out to them, because you admire and respect them. So No, it was just this little thing I've been doing for a lot of years now, and it served me really, really well.
I think by doing that, I think it's also coming through in your writing and as well. Like you can see that there's a lot of thought and all those conversations. I think it's probably even challenged your thinking in terms of that's the way that it's coming across in your article. So it's a full credit to you that you actually did that when you were playing. But what was the difference between the player and then going on the other side and then having to be a coach? Like, what did you notice the biggest differences in? Obviously, it's vastly different, but explain to people the differences out there of going from being a gun player to all of a sudden trying to translate that into being a coach?
I think I did it really quickly, which if I had my time again, I would have taken my time and done the assistant coaching route first. But probably the biggest thing is that I think every professional player has a sense of ego and selfishness. Not that it overrides everything, but it exists. And I think as a coach, it just can't exist. You have to be authentic in, people talk about empathy and all that sort of thing, and they're all fantastic words, but you've genuinely got to care about each individual player and understand and get to know each individual player and understand that they all need something different. And that Don Nelson piece and some of the others about thinking outside the square a little bit and not just doing things because other coaches have done them, trusting your gut and doing things that are right based on your knowledge of the individual and your knowledge of the team, not based on what's written in a textbook or someone else has done before. And that's something I didn't get right when I was coaching the Tigers and, why I got the flick. But I was brand new to it. But, I think the biggest thing now is I think the greatest responsibility of a coach is to positively impact behaviour and habit. And I think wins and losses come next. I think a lot of young coaches get that the wrong way around, where they're trying to prove that they can coach instead of earning trust and earning respect and, living what you're teaching. But I think, just taking the time to get to know people, because if you think of it, that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
I look back to, even Gorgon used to have us come to his house and with partners, family, and you just felt like a part of their lives. And because of that, you would do anything for him. It's the whole cliche, nobody cares what you know until they know how much you care. So you've got to prove that, I think, day in, day out as a coach.
Yeah. What do you think separates the absolute, like you've been, obviously you've been in America and Australia and you've seen enough of the champions of the highest level in either country. What do you reckon separates the absolute top of the absolute guns in their field? Like, I know the reason why I asked that, I know there's a great story that you had in regards to Steve Nash and his work ethic, but yeah, I know it's a long-winded question, but what do you think really separates, from being an average run-of-the-mill player to the actual champions?
As a player, it's just that. It's time invested away from the group. Everybody turns up to training because they have to. But even the hardest of trainers, or the team training, very rarely goes for more than 2 or 3 hours in a day. You've still got 21, 22 hours left. What do you do with them? Steve was the hardest. You mentioned Steve Nash was the hardest worker I've ever seen. And the other thing was, the story I wrote was, I caught him one night about 9:30 at night in the middle of a season, in a dead sweat, sprinting up and down the floor. And I was in there getting treatment, and I'd worked hard that day. And he was doing more. And I sort of walked in, and by the time I came back, he was nearly done. So I sat and I waited for him, and he was shooting these 1-foot running jump shots, which no one did back then. It was always left, right, or right, left, be balanced, straight up. And he said to me when it was done, he's like, I'm not quick enough or athletic enough, but I shoot the ball pretty well. If I take the time to come to a 2-foot stop, I'm going to get my shot blocked. I'm going to be out of this league. And so he was teaching himself in his own time to shoot jump shots while he was traveling at the same speed as when he beat his defender. Everyone now in basketball teaches runners or floaters, which is essentially what Steve was doing. But, at the time that he was doing that, Steve was getting booed by our home fans. Every time he touched the ball, he was struggling so much. So you've got an arena full of 15,000 fans booing your starting point guard for weeks on end. It was brutal. Never complained, never stopped working. And, he slowly came out of that. But to fast forward for the non-basketball people listening, you fast forward 6 or 7 years. He won the most valuable player award of the NBA and then won it 2 years in a row. And the runners-up was Kobe Bryant. I mean, that's how good Steve became. And, they asked him about it. And I'll never forget his quote was, "If everybody worked as hard as me, I'd be out of a job." Yeah. He just outworked people. He found ways, he found new things, he found ways to get better. He was incredible. And at the same time, if he walked into a room of footy players that didn't know basketball, you'd be sitting there having a beer with him and you wouldn't even know he was any good. Really good.
Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate, to sit down and really, really discuss all the, like I said at the start, it's like, mate, it's like you need a PR agent out there or something like that to push your wheelbarrow, mate, because I think in terms of not only your record in Australian basketball, but I know in terms of the people that do see the articles that you write and the thought that goes into them and the message that comes across, I think if you do decide to write your book, I think it'll be an absolute cracker. So what is one last question, what's Chris Anstey working on now? I know you mentioned...
Well, clearly a book. No, I'm... No, look, I'm the head basketball coach at Caulfield Grammar. I do some corporate consulting and I'm an ambassador for Latrobe Financial. Work with the Cedar Education Group. So I think the term's portfolio career. So I've got a few other little things on the side. I do some speaking and all that type of thing. But the reason I got into it all is probably the reason that you called today was I've been around some really amazing people, and I've learned so much from sort of sometimes sitting back and watching, sometimes being a part of it. And the people who taught me aren't around to teach everybody else. And if I can pass on some of the messages that stood me in pretty good stead, then it's almost a responsibility that I feel to be able to share them. So, everything I do is hopefully got to do with, at some level, helping others do a little bit better than what they're currently doing. And I enjoy telling stories. I enjoy reliving some of the things I've done. But let's call it a portfolio career for now. And you never know, there might be a book come out of it one day.
Yeah, well, not that we're pressuring you at all, and not that we're lumping pressure on to be a bestseller. But look, like I said, there's a lot for people out there. If you want to follow Chris on social media, how can they follow you?
Generally, just look up Chris Anstey 13. So you'll find it, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any of them. So come and have a chat. I enjoy the conversations. Yeah,
like I said to you the other day, we're highly original footballers, aren't we, with our social media?
I know, we really are. I know. You always figure out what a player's favourite number was. It's always on their email address or on their social media. Or you're spot on.
It was. And look, an absolute pleasure, like we said. You hear a lot of gems out of today. I know I've learned a lot, and hopefully everyone else out there has. And they can go to the YouTube page where they'll see all these interviews, not only with Chris, but we've had the likes of Wayne Carey, Glenn Archer, Wayne Swass, Tony Doherty, where you can see all the back catalogue of all these interviews. And once again, it was great to have you, and great to have the big fella in Chris Anstey.
Cheers, Corey. Thanks for having me, mate. Appreciate it.
Thanks, mate.